911, this is the police.
Help. Help. I can't talk right now. Help.
On November 23rd, 2018, at approximately 9:30 at night, Cobb County 911 dispatch received a 911 emergency call from a male saying he was hurt and he needed help. He needed the police. The first arriving units arrived. They heard somebody saying, "Help me," from upstairs. And when they bust into the room, they see a black veiled subject lying against the bedroom wall.
He kept saying that he was shot. However, the first responders there didn't see any bullet holes. Mitchell had been stabbed multiple times. When they asked him, "Who did this to you?" he wasn't able to give a response or a name. He just continued to say, "He took my phone." Then the ambulance arrived on scene, and so he was transported to the hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds.
As I opened the door, I seen passive spatter on the floor. Passive blood spatter is droplets of blood that are only affected by the force of gravity. They're not being cast by any other external force. I know that the incident took place upstairs. There was no way that that was the victim's blood. That had to have been left by another person.
The biggest challenge was the suspect took Mitchell's phone. Inside Mitchell's bedroom, we found several cell phones where he made the 911 call. It was an older phone.
Mitchell Jones had a secondary phone that he was able to call 911 from. But a primary phone was taken from the crime scene. And that's significant for us because obviously the perpetrator put some weight into what that evidence might yield for investigators.
The next day, myself and Detective Pinarelli canvassed the neighborhood, and we did notice there was a camera pointed in the general direction of the victim's house. They did not want to be involved, but they did allow us to come into the residence and capture the video footage. We knew the crime happened approximately 9:30 at night because the victim is the one that called 911. So we go to that date and that time, and as we look, we see a black vehicle backing out of the victim's driveway.
We were able to figure out that it was a black Buick Lucerne.
So now we have a time frame. We have a vehicle, a suspect blood, but we had no suspects.
In February 2019, I attended a cell phone investigations class. We're going over typical standard cell phone investigations using historical data, using pings, using cell site data. But the instructor towards the end starts introducing me to something I hadn't heard before. It was the term geofence. What a geofence is a virtual perimeter around a geographical location in a certain date and time. We articulate that in a search warrant to the service provider and tell them to provide us the cellular devices that were within our geographical perimeter at that point in time. Right there, sitting in the chair, I realized we have this active open homicide investigation. It's going cold, and we could potentially use this tool.
I'm in my office one day when I get a call from Detective David Racy with the police department. I became really excited about the prospects. I just learned about the technology myself. So we're talking about, well, what is this gonna look like? We have Mitchell Jones's 911 call. We know almost the precise time of the assault against him. So the plan is that we are going to set a geographic location around the crime scene and ask the company what users were in this setting at this given period of time.
So we narrow it down by the time that the suspect entered and left the crime scene.
We see that there's 4 potential users within the crime scene at the given period of time that we're interested in.
We asked Google for subscriber information for these 4 devices. 2 of them were elderly couples, and they lived in that area, on that street. We felt that they just weren't physically capable of committing this type of violence. One was probably the right age, probably the right physical stature, but had zero criminal history, none to speak of. The last one left had the right criminal background that would fit our offender, Dante Holmes. We learned that he had a criminal history of prior aggravated assaults and he had prior thefts, and so he fit a potential offender of a crime such as this.
When we started investigating Dante Holmes, it breathed new life into the case. We had never heard his name before, so we began digging into his cell phones. Everything that we were finding was adding up, looking better and better and better.
We find that there's an image that's been uploaded to the iCloud shortly after the homicide that's perpetrated, showing that he has an injury to one of his legs, consistent with the blood evidence that we had recovered from the crime scene.
We knew from the security footage that a Buick Lucerne was at Mitchell Jones's house. And we learned that his mother also owned a Buick Lucerne. It was a car he drove all the time.
We were able to match Dante's cell phone records to Mitchell's phone records, and it shows their phones being at the crime scene together and then how their phones traveled together at the same time in every tower that they hit all the way to Atlanta.
Dante Holmes was arrested in South Atlanta. We transported him back to the Crimes Against Persons office for an interview. He said that it was self-defense. Mitchell had pulled the knife on him. They tussled over it. He ended up getting the knife away, and he stabbed Mitchell multiple times. He also told us that he actually threw that knife away.
When I heard that he is claiming that this is self-defense, I actually began to evaluate the crime scene in a very different way now. While no one can say precisely what went on leading up to the actual assault and homicide itself definitively, because we weren't there in the room, the level of brutality that's perpetrated against Mitchell Jones, the fact that he fled from the crime scene and never called 911, the fact that he took the victim's cell phone, all show us that this is a completely baseless claim.
Once Dante was in custody, we obtained a search warrant for his DNA in his house. We weren't able to find Mitchell's phone, but Dante's DNA was the match to the blood that was collected from the night of the crime scene.
On January 6, 2020, Dante Holmes pled guilty to malice murder, aggravated assault, and various other miscellaneous offenses, and was sentenced to life in prison.
I don't think he should ever see the light of day again. I'm sorry, I can't finish my statement. I can forgive him, but there's no weight off my shoulder. I miss my son.
After this case, the floodgates were sort of opened regarding geofence technology. I've used it countless times since then to advance investigations, to solve more crimes. More importantly, we've used this as a platform to be able to teach other prosecutors about the utility and benefit of this technology.
The geofence technology just really sprung this case into life. If it were not for that, there's a possibility it will not be solved. That means that the victim's family is not getting closure. All these years I've been in law enforcement, and this is what I do it for the families, for people who can't speak for themselves, people who can't help themselves.